disaster management cycle. Okay, so what is the meaning of this disaster management cycle? Simply we should understand whatever the steps that are being taken to deal with that particular disaster or to prevent any kind of human loss, life loss, and along with that property loss, and increase the capacity of the human, or simply we can say community, to deal with that disaster, that is increasing the resilience of the community and resilience of the human made infrastructure to withstand those disasters. So all these activities will be clubbed here in three aspects: pre-disaster, during disaster, and post disaster. What kind of activities involved here? Let's understand that. In pre-disaster, disaster preparedness, mitigation measures, disaster prevention, all these aspects are considered in pre-disaster. Okay, it can include the early warning system also. Okay, so that is part of, we can say, preparedness. Now, during disaster, so during disaster the focus is on response and relief. The focus is on response and relief. And post disaster, during the post disaster time period, the focus is on rehabilitation and reconstruction. This is what we can say that the cycle is. We can draw this in a pictographic format also. How? Suppose there is a disaster happening here. Okay, so disaster has happened here. Then during disaster, what is first one? Response. Okay, so immediate response is very important aspect here. Then after response, rescue. After response, rescue, or we can say that it is part of response itself. So we simply say that in response we will write like this: rescue and relief. So immediate relief we are talking here. Rescuing is also important. For example, suppose flood situation is there. Okay, so during flood we need to rescue people. Landslide happened, we need to rescue people. Also suppose there is any kind of, let's say, urban floods have happened. So people may get stuck in particular situation, and therefore rescuing is very important. Suppose there is no avalanche happened, again rescuing is very important. Now in relief, immediate relief is very important aspect here, because they will require some kind of food, shelter, medicine. Food, shelter, medicine. The basic aspect, including clothes also, of course, clean clothes will be required, medicine will be required. So immediate relief is very important aspect of response. Okay, then after response, you can talk about the post disaster. Okay, rehabilitation and reconstruction. So after some days, after giving immediate relief, they need to be let's say rehabilitated. In rehabilitation, what are the activities required here in rehabilitation? We require to provide them, let's say, also for some time period, food supply at subsidized rate, then housing, affordable housing is required, health and sanitation, and basic sustainable livelihood sources. This is part of rehabilitation, so that they once again start living their social life. Okay, so this is important aspect of rehabilitation. It includes resettlement also. Sometimes it includes resettlement also. So it will be there in the rehabilitation. Reconstruction. Okay, so reconstruction largely relates to the human property, or we can say that it is talking about build back better. Build back better. This is what the Sendai framework also says. The focus on reconstruction. And when we reconstruct the infrastructure or whatever the infrastructure in that disaster affected area, that should be better than earlier, more resilient to such kind of disasters in future. उसको हम reconstruction बोल रहे हैं. Okay, so whatever the new infrastructure we are building, it should be more resilient, more kind of adaptive to such kind of disasters, and that is important component of reconstruction. Then we will come to the next part of cycle, again pre-disaster, and in that prevention. Mitigation, preparedness, disaster preparedness, again possibility of disaster. This is what the cycle is. Okay, so you can see here, this is long term, largely it is after a disaster, this is during and after disaster, and this is pre-disaster. So again you can see here in the prevention. Now in prevention, the sustainable practices we need to adopt. Practices like ecotourism. एग्जाम्पल मैं दे रहा हूँ, ठीक है, कोई भी एक एग्जाम्पल, सो एज टू प्रिवेंट सच काइंड ऑफ डिजास्टर टू हैपन. जैसे लैंडस्लाइड है तो वहां पे हम बोलेंगे कि स्लोप स्टेबलाइजेशन इज इंपॉर्टेंट कंपोनेंट. स्लोप स्टेबलाइजेशन इज इंपॉर्टेंट कंपोनेंट देयर. अफॉरेस्टेशन, ऑल दीज आर मेजर्स. Even in mitigation, what we are trying to do is we are trying to reduce the impact of any disaster that may happen in future. That is called as mitigation. What is the meaning of mitigation? Reducing the impact, reducing the loss from that disaster. Okay, so if you are taking the example of cyclone mitigation, obviously building the shelter belt along the we can say coastal areas, or strengthening the mangrove vegetation along the coastal areas. All these are we can talk about, let's say, salt tolerant varieties, growing salt tolerant varieties in that region. So any kind of salt water ingress, again mitigation, ensuring food security. So इस तरीके से हम बोलेंगे कि impact कम करना है हमें यहाँ पर. In preparedness, again we are focusing on preparing to deal with that disaster. Suppose in any case disaster happens. So how to deal with that? For example, early warning system. Example, building multi-dimensional, we can say multi-purpose shelter homes, right? So that is disaster preparedness. So obviously we know that there are two important time periods in a year where there is possibility always of having the cyclone on the eastern coast. ठीक है, जैसे मार्च अप्रैल मई मंथ इज देयर एंड ड्यूरिंग द let's say withdrawal of monsoon time period, September, October, November time period is there. So there is always chance that the cyclone will. तो साइक्लोन को प्रिवेंट तो नहीं किया जा सकता है, अर्थक्वेक को प्रिवेंट नहीं किया जा सकता है. So for that purpose we need to be prepared. We need to reduce the impact. So that means we need to make our infrastructure resilient, mitigation. ये सारी चीजें काम में आती है वहां पे, जहां पे प्रिवेंट नहीं कर सकते, जहां पे हम प्रिवेंट नहीं कर सकते वहां पे ये दो काम आते हैं ज्यादा, मिटिगेशन एंड प्रिपेयर्डनेस. And more the prepared we are to deal with that situation, and the loss of life and property will be less. For example, how we have strengthened our preparedness to this cyclone disaster. So from 1999 super cyclone of Odisha, which resulted into loss of life of more than 10,000 people, to if we are talking about the present day, so any kind of cyclone impact happens, not more than 50 deaths happens today. The reason is that we are more prepared to deal with that. Cyclone change नहीं हुआ है, cyclone उसी intensity से है. So cyclone Philene was almost a kind of super cyclone. Okay, so wind speed is same, the nature of cyclone impact, the areas, vulnerability, everything is same. Simply we should understand that we are more prepared now. This shows the importance of this area. ठीक है? Yes. So now you have understood disaster management cycle.